Okay, hello everyone. So, thank you for coming. Today we're going to talk about activism in financial commons and DeFi. So, if you look actually at the painting on the first slide, it's freedom led by the people. Can you actually imagine it without the people? It would look strange, right? So, the whole point that we're going to try to make here is that if we do not participate in governance and if we do not participate in decentralize anything, it will be pointless. Quick forward. So don't buy anything, don't sign anything, don't write any contract after what I'm going to tell to you. The whole point here is just to actually understand that we need to change things and we need to start acting. So first of all, let's start with the basics, right? So why do we want to build DeFi? Why do we want to build new financial primitives? Is what we have right now not enough? Well, first of all, by building permissionless technologies, we're actually going to democratizing financial services. This means that we can bank the unbanked, fund the unfunded. This allows us to treat finance more as a tool than what it actually is right now, which is a tool of concentration of wealth. Anyone can create a fund, anyone can create a bank. It means that you can't actually be forbidden an access to financial services. This also means that people who were actually victims of the previous and current financial system can opt out of it. Because you cannot opt out of the financial system, they actually have to uphold values to keep the people in this system. And because you can opt out in an infinite manner of ways, by forking protocols, for example, it also means that you can customize your risk and the parameters you actually want to use. So we're basically creating financial commons which anyone is going to be able to use. And you'll see why I'm not actually using the definition DeFi, which is decentralized finance, but financial commons. It's for one simple reason. I think financial commons are much more ambitious than just DeFi. Because the idea with DeFi is that we're recreating financial services where everyone can have their word and they're decentralized. There is no central point of focus, right? But financial commons are so much more than just DeFi. In a sense, there are primitives that will allow people to actually use the financial system in a much broader way and on a much more long term. So if we actually want to build DeFi as a base primitive for finance, and if we want to build it on the long term, we need to think in commons, not just a financial service. So, activism, what is it? Because it's going to be the main topic of the talk, so we might as well talk about it, right? It's just campaigning. So activism is basically, it can happen in politics, in society, or in business, but it's just communication. It's expressing ideas, it's campaigning for them, it's debating around them, and it's convincing people. So everything is basically marketing and communications, to make it very short. If you look at the way it works in DeFi right now, you go on forums, you put up, you have ideas, you can put them on Twitter too, you talk with people, you actually reach consensus, you check if consensus is happening, you vote on it, and once the vote passes, it's implemented. So that's the way we've actually done it. The way it actually works in traditional finance, because they are, and we have to be honest with it, we're much more amateur than them right now. In the shareholder governance model, basically, only funds and the management of companies actually participate in them. And if you look at the problem in DeFi, it's the same. It's the core teams and the funds who are participating. So what the problem we have is that people who are not actually working in the company or directly working on a protocol or who don't have large stakes in the protocol don't actually care right now. The whole problem and the whole thing we actually have to realize in activism is that we need to find ways for people who have smaller stakes or who don't actually spend their life in a protocol to actually participate in it. And that's the whole point today with activism. And with DeFi and with financial commons, we have an opportunity to change the flow of the way it's happening. Because if you look at large companies today, they have around, usually management and funds have, even when they're public companies, they have over 80% of the company, right? So whatever happens, they're going to be overwhelmingly in the majority. But if you look in DeFi, it's the opposite. We, as normal user, we have 80%. And yet, we still do not lead the protocols because we do not vote, we do not care. So, let's go back a bit with commons. I'm going to talk a lot about this. These are not my own. These principles come from Elinor Ostrom, from managing the commons. And the idea is that there's 8 different principles that allow you to manage correctly a common. So if you actually look at them, we already have implemented them in almost all of the DAOs, more or less efficiently, right? And the whole point is reaching a maximum capacity on all of these. I actually want to focus on 3 of them, because if I would talk 50 minutes if we had to focus on all 8 of them. So I want to talk about them because it shows the necessity of actually being active into protocols. The first one is the rules. So rules only work if they're in the context. It means that if a certain things happen in DeFi and works one way in 2018, doesn't mean it will work in 2021. That's why there's a bear case against protocols who have no governance, because they will probably have a hard time in adapting to new situations. And the whole point is that it's not up to the core team to choose who is going to, what the chains are going to be, but it's up to the users of the protocol. So that's the second thing. These rules are defined into parameters, and us as users have to give input to change these parameters. And that's something that's really important because we're not doing it right now in crypto, especially in DeFi. Because if we want all users to have a say in a protocol, of course they can talk about in a forum, but most of them can't vote if they don't buy a stake in the protocol. That's where liquidity mining is genius, basically, because it allows people who use the protocol to automatically get a stake in it, which means that you, as a user, as long as you use the protocol, you will have means to actually express yourself on the way the protocol is going to change. And there is no one that's better suited to explain how a certain protocol is going to change than the person who's actually using it and the ones who are operating it. So it's very important to understand that we will never really have financial commons unless people can actually constantly get a bit of the share of the decision-making power. That's the base of commons, and we're really not doing it right now in crypto. And the last one, it's also something we're not doing, but that's the hardest, it's accountability. Means that any action that's done by a stakeholder or someone that's in the management of the protocol is actually going to have to be held liable for what he's doing. So when you do bad decision, it's not okay and you brush it over, it's the users can choose if you get to stay or not. So this happens with councils, right? But core teams are much more immovable. So we have to start thinking about, on the long term, what's the place of a core team, for example, in the protocol? And all these questions actually need to be answered for us before we actually want to thrive in governance. Now, let's look at it on the more complex lens. How is it actually happening today? So the painting is actually quite grim when you look at it, because if you look at the 3 biggest governance protocols, so we did the numbers with Aave, Uniswap, and Compound, you have only 700 people who vote more than once. And if you look at who voted more than twice, it's only 300 people. So it gets kind of low, right? It means that 95% of the tokens are not used. So over 95% of the people actually do not care about the governance. And this means that we are doing exactly the same thing that's what's happening with public companies and corporate governance. So we're recreating what already existed. Another thing that's very confusing is that there's a lot of different governance frameworks, and there's going to be a whole lot more of them. So it's hard to actually understand what's happening in a protocol, and when you find a new protocol, you have to understand everything again. Another thing that was really interesting and was on the Maker Forum, you guys should spend time on the Maker Forums, they have a lot of data. Is that you need around, it's probably exaggerated, let's be honest, 40 hours per week to truly understand a protocol. It means that you actually cannot be active in a lot of protocols, right? Because you can't spend 120 hours just doing governance, because it doesn't pay right now. So there's an information overflow too. And one last thing is that there's a lot of money in DeFi, let's be honest, and there's even more of money in the treasuries. The problem is that the governance infrastructure and our behaviors as governees is not adapted to what's currently the necessary frameworks for this to work. It means that we're not ready yet to actually manage these kind of amounts. And we're actually seeing it. We're not doing a good job at it. So we have to be more honest about the way it's actually going. And we have to find ways to have more people, more experts, more interested people participating into governance. One really important thing is to understand that stakeholders doesn't just mean people holding the token. It's all the people that are going to participate or affect the governance. So I actually decided to just put holders in one category. It can be the team, it can be the investors, and also just the people who just bought the token, right? But there's a lot of other people, because I don't want to put delegates in the same category for one simple reason. What makes you so sure that the delegate has skin in the game for the protocol? He's spending time on your protocol, yes, but does it mean that he actually owns any token? There's a lot of different interests for external actors, which don't have to be delegates, to actually participate in governance and ask to be delegates. For example, a Yearn, a core dev, could very well be a delegate in Gitcoin, or a delegate in, would be more interesting, for example, in Aave, because they're using the vaults, right? So they actually need to have a voice, but it doesn't mean they actually need to have governance tokens. They just can have, because of their reputation, people that already use their protocol, giving them voting power. So they're not actual actors because they don't have holders, because they don't have skin in the game. On the same way, and that's something that's very regulated by financial regulation, it's influencers. You shouldn't, it's actually very regulated to talk about price, to talk about the health of a company. But we have TikTok, we used to have at least, TikTok videos about it. We have Twitter, we have the forums. Everyone's able to get their saying on what's happening in a protocol. So it's actually very, it makes it so governance is very chaotic today. And we have to understand that all these people actually participate one way or another on the way governance is actually happening. So as long as we don't know where everyone stands, and we don't look at the data before actually putting up a vote, we don't know who's thinking what, which is possible to do, right? We will be amateurs in governance. And that's the biggest problem right now when you compare professional activists in hedge funds and activists in crypto. We're very amateurish in the sense that we do not prepare our votes, we do not have strategies beforehand, we do not have an idea of what are the current stakeholders, and as long as we don't have these ideas, we'll never actually be able to currently hold healthy votes. Let's speed up a bit. The need for activism, basically, I just wanted to finish quickly on this. And that's, I think, very important, decentralization, the whole point is actually having people voting and people participating and people creating proposal and becoming what intermediaries used to do in financial services, right? So if we do not participate, if no one participates, if just the core team and the investors participate, it's exactly the same thing as a traditional financial service. So we need activism. If we do, it's the fuel of governance. It's also its guardrail. It guarantees resilience, because if someone is doing something wrong, like a lot of people saw in the DeFi education fund, for example, what happens is that people will complain and will vote against them. But this didn't happen. You had 6 people chatting in the governance forum, they voted, and then people whined on Twitter. It was too late. The vote was on chain. People could have looked at what was happening. And the last thing, and we're going to talk about Uniswap a bit more to finish with this, is that, as I mentioned before, DeFi allows us to have an infinite number of opting out options. This means that if you do not agree with the protocol, you can just fork the code and create your own community around it. And that's a very important lesson of crypto and DeFi in general, is that if you do not try to build a community, if you do not try to go and push for activism, well, people will just leave because they don't believe in your values. So let's talk about Uniswap very quickly, because I think it exemplifies a lot. First of all, Uniswap is a great team. They built a killer product. But right now, they're really lacking in governance. They're trying to fix it, right? But they built a financial common. Uniswap is perfectly permissionless. It's open source. It does everything well for a financial common, basically. But they had no community. The core team was just building their thing, and no one had a say in it. So what happens is that people say, okay, you want to build a common, but you're not giving us the governance. You're not giving the users responsibility of the parameters. Easy, we're going to fork you, sushi peered. So that's what happens. Either you're an activist, if you want to build DeFi, people fork you. So today, it's actually really important to care and build a community and actually go their way, at least a minimum. The other part is about distribution. We have a lot of talks about VCs, if they should be or not in crypto, if they should invest in the protocols. I don't think it's about investing. The problem is about what's their governance stake and how can they influence something. So as long as you know that there's a counterbalance with your community, it's okay. The problem is that it's never okay. So that's the thing. We have to think about ways for community to counterbalance large holders in protocols. And there's a lot of work that's being done with reputation-based models, etc., etc. We actually saw this, right? In the last Uniswap vote, you have 6 people who voted and had the 99% of the yes votes. It means you can say, okay, yes, they had overwhelming amount of votes. Yes, but we could have coordinated and voted against them. We didn't. So we can only blame ourselves for what's happening. And we actually blame ourselves as team, right? So with my team, Paladin, we've actually trying to be thinking about solution. How do we actually want to help governance go forward? We're trying to create governance liquidity so that people who don't care about voting can just give up their vote to people who care more and who can push for change. We want to create new incentive models to actually push, because we're in a speculative world, right? Especially in DeFi. So if people want money, let's find a way to actually give them money and give them the right incentives for the right behaviors. Because right now, incentives and governance are not aligned. And the last one we're actually trying to do is create coordination mechanism to reduce the inequalities between large and majority and minority holders. Okay, so if there's actually one thing we can finish on, it's really easy, basically. It's act. It's just one thing you need to do. You need to vote, you need to delegate, you need to talk with people. If you really care about DeFi, not just about the price, you need to be in governance, because that's where all is happening. Thank you. Do we have time for questions?
Yes.
Okay. So, any question? Okay. Well,
could you just explain a bit more about what Paladin do and like more technically and everything?
Yep, sure. So basically, to give the broader idea, we're just trying to democratize activism. So this goes through creating coordinating mechanism, and I wouldn't say trying to burn down the bad behaviors in governance. So the first thing we're actually doing is creating what we call governance lending, which allows people who don't care and who just want extra yield to give up their vote and allow people who want to borrow it to actually access new vote. So of course it can be used in a very bad way, right? And accelerate the behaviors we're actually trying to fight. So it's all about building guardrails on the protocols. It's about talking with the community and seeing what kind of behaviors they don't want to be. It's about seeing how we can enforce everything on chain. What we're actually seeing is that a lot of governance, and the idea of DeFi and financial commons is putting all the important data on chain so everyone can know what's happening, right? But all the debates, everything that's happening in the back room, we don't see it on chain. And there's a world where we could actually imagine that every backroom deals, every deal-making thing could happen on chain, and we could see what's happening in real time, because there would be more incentives to do things on chain than off chain. And I think that there's a really bull case, and that's what we're trying to do, in pushing good and bad behavior on chain to to give more access for anyone to understand what's happening in governance and be able to understand the governance game. Because it's a game. We're playing a game, the game of governance, and we should show people it's fun. Because that's the way we're actually going to push people to use it. Yep.
So following up on that, in a practical example, so say a whole bunch of people delegate their governance power to a single individual for simplicity's sake. Then in there, would you, and that group of people happens to disagree with the decision that needs to be based. So how would that individual act? Would they go back to create consensus so it's a proxy, right? Would the proxy create consensus within the big group of people that delegated their governance to them? Or would it be like majority rule? Or how would the proxy represent the group if the group doesn't agree?
So, we're talking about proxy voting, right? Not with Paladin, but in traditional governance system, just to be sure.
To my ears, it's very similar, but if it's different, you can tell me.
No, so basically, our product is totally neutral in the sense that the people who relinquish their voting, right, who basically loan them, they don't care about voting. Okay. So it's not representation, it's transactional. And I think we have to be honest about the way governance is happening today, because the mechanism we're trying to implement, they're nothing new. This is already happening off-chain, right? And we'd rather have these behaviors on-chain and before votes than actually during votes. It's actually better to know when you create a proposal and the snapshot happens, to know who's actually ready to go to war, basically, that having some kind of ping-pong game during the governance where you see someone buying 100,000 yes votes. There's actually something really big that happened and that was highlighted in the Italian newsletter. It's a really high quality newsletter, by the way. They were saying that Justin Sun tried to, they borrowed 60,000 comp tokens. So that's around $2 million, I think, at current price. And basically bought his way to add his own stable coin as a collateral in Compound. And he used it using compound. So these platforms have a compound already enable these kind of behaviors, right? The idea is how do we create a much more specialized lending protocol to actually enclose this behavior correctly. So that's what we've been trying to do for the past few months, and we'll actually be live with something probably before end of summer.
So I know there's like Elastic DAO that is trying to create like fair governance and everything. Are you like working with them or the way to interact with them, or you just want to be put on top of pretty much every DAO and doesn't care about the protocol and the framework?
So right now we're focused on shareholder type governance, right? So it's the governor alpha. It's basically the biggest one. I think Elastic DAO is a really good concept. I'm a very big fan of what LSDAN has been doing. Our current technology can't work with them. It's actually, we're going in basically different ways in governance. They're basically trying to go on a reputation based where it's not one person, one identity, but you have a limited cap of the way you can basically act. I love the concept. I think it's a bit harder to implement with lucrative protocols, because where there's money, there's the stakes, and there's incentive for people to actually get more and more shares, more and more control. So it kind of gets counterintuitive anyway. But for example, for associations, I think it's the perfect model. Yep. Thank you very much for coming.